Now when I was a young boy, about the age of 5, my teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No, sir, I'd be no average man. So I had those big dreams.
Welcome back, everyone, to Eat the Rich. This is a show about our political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off its death rattle. I'm Dwight, and today we have with us Shane.
I'm gonna pass out.
You do that?
I hope that works stereo.
we've got Chris.
Hello.
And we've got Carrie. Wow. Okay. This is, I hope you've tuned into last week's episode. This is part 2 of our episodes on McKinsey. So I will turn it over, Carrie, to you.
Yeah, so last week, and definitely not just a couple of minutes ago, we were talking about McKinsey's business practices. And today I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about a few of the ways that McKinsey facilitates the quote-unquote missions of different arms of law enforcement.
Hell yeah.
Starting with ICE. And then I'll also talk a little bit about their work with police and prisons. So you might be wondering, what can a company like McKinsey do for the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency? Well, ICE has a lot of problems. Part of their stated mission is protecting our borders, and the arm of ICE that you're probably most familiar with, even if you don't know it by name, is Enforcement and Removal Operations, or ERO for short. These are the guys who are tasked with finding undocumented immigrants and locking them up, basically. When Border Patrol picks up a bunch of people who have been detained at the border, they head over to an ERO office and hand them off. And so ERO then is responsible for safely housing and feeding these people as the deportation process unfolds. And they wanted to make this more efficient and cost-effective. Now, they could just stop detaining so many people who are just trying to cross the border in desperation, but that's obviously not an option, in part because of the Trump administration's mandate to ramp up immigration detention and hire 10,000 additional employees back in 2017.
Jesus.
So for the small fee of $20 million, that's where McKinsey comes in. And to be clear, I'm going to be talking here about the Trump administration in a specific period from 2017 to 2018, but their partnership does predate Trump. Like many other government agencies, they've partnered with McKinsey before for similar issues. This is just one of the more recent sort of scandals that have come about. This all did come out in 2019 as a result of a joint investigation conducted by the New York Times and ProPublica. Prior to this, in 2018, McKinsey actually ended their relationship with ICE, with one of the managing partners saying that they, quote, will not under any circumstances engage in any work anywhere in the world that advances or assists policies that are at odds with our values. And I just wanted to mention that because I thought that that was incredibly funny. If you know anything about...
true. That is true. They're right.
That actually is, it's technically very true.
Yeah, it's their values that are fucked.
Yeah, not in the way that they mean, but...
Right. So, like I said, according to that 2019 ProPublica piece, ICE turned to McKinsey in the early part of 2017 when the newly elected President Trump really started going hard on immigration. There's obviously a logistical challenge with dramatically increasing the number of people that you detain and employ, and McKinsey was happy to help. But interestingly, according to documents obtained by these reporters, they weren't just there to help, they were seemingly in charge of the process, despite acting like they were very hands-off, had nothing to do with it. I looked at some of the documents that were made publicly available, including emails between ICE staffers, and I wanted to read a couple of emails about how they kind of describe the contract and what it entails, and their discussion about the contract extension itself, because the contract was about to be up, and they needed to, renew that contract for $20 million. And then we'll talk about what all of that means. So the first email is dated May 24th, and it's under a string of emails that have already been exchanged about this. Basically, what they're trying to do is get the McKinsey contract extended before it expires, like I said, and they're having some back and forth about it. This first email is from a contracting officer with detention, compliance, and removals, and it describes the attached contract. The subject is regarding Tracy, extending our McKinsey contractual period of performance, ? So reading here from it, redacted. Attached is the contract with McKinsey. The contract has 3 overall tasks. The primary task of the contract is called Transformation Task 3, which is essentially McKinsey working with ERO to implement recommendations from their contract with us. And skipping ahead a little here, it says, a second task on the contract is called Total Cost of Ownership, which deals with contracts in OAQ. OAQ is the Office of Acquisition Management. And then skipping ahead a little more, the third task he mentions is Talent Management Strategy, dealing with HR. So I just wanted to read that little bit to give some context about how this work is talked about internally, and then we'll talk about what exactly that work is that they described in such like clinical business terms or professional terms, as they might prefer to be called.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are a few more emails back and forth about this, but the next set of interesting emails is dated May 31st. And these are from the same contracting officer, same subject, continuing the same conversation. They're trying to work out the details of the contract. Hi, redacted. I'll be back tomorrow. In the meantime, OHC, that's the Office of Human Capital, has indicated that they too plan to extend the task associated with HR for a maximum of 6 months. When I reached out for the justification and the statement of objectives/work, they provided a white paper. However, the document was prepared by McKinsey. Can they do that? And then a follow-up email, again from the same staffer. Well, it obviously isn't ideal to have a contractor tell us what we want to ask them to do, but unless we can get OHC or anyone else at ICE to articulate what our objectives are, what other option is there?
What the fuck?
So basically what he's saying, what he's saying is McKinsey is in charge of directing what their work per ICE would be. And there is, in these emails that I read and in the other emails in the chain, there's like this air of inevitability. The people on this email chain don't seem happy, but they also know that they're stuck with whatever McKinsey wants. And I don't know why that is exactly, but it obviously is not good. So what exactly was the work that they were doing? For some insight on that, we can look at some of the other internal documents that were released along with these emails, and among them was a slide deck from a March 2017 meeting that touches specifically on that second contractual task mentioned in that email, TCO, Total Cost of Ownership. And the objectives for this meeting are listed as review savings opportunities in detention contracts and root causes of process challenges, decide to move forward to capture the value at stake, agree on how we will work together to pursue the opportunity. Now, unfortunately, as I'm sure you can imagine, more than half of this stuff is redacted, but there's still a lot we can glean from what we can see. Things like an emphasis on detention savings opportunities. One slide under that heading says, quote, we estimate approximately $150 to $385 million in savings may be possible on approximately $1.4 billion third-party detention facility spend. Of this, approximately $130 to $270 million through facility rate reduction. So what does that mean? They go on to explain that the influx of detainees brought on by the Trump administration's new guidance will put ICE in a better position to negotiate with vendors and facility operators because they're going to be bringing in such a huge chunk of revenue by detaining tens of thousands more people than was previously expected. At no point do they reference them as people, by the way. Detained undocumented immigrants are referred to as beds, and a chart showing the potential increase numbers refers to them as the, quote, estimated ICE detention supply. So the supply of detainees is how they refer to them.
Oh my God.
I mean, it's unsurprising that it's completely dehumanizing. That's how these companies look at everything, but it's still shocking. And that wasn't like the only place that they saw room for cost savings. Apart from negotiating using the ample supply of incarcerated people, another cost-cutting measure was lowering standards for those incarcerated people.
Oh my God.
McKinsey suggested cutting costs on food, medical care, and facility maintenance. Perhaps most alarmingly, they also recommended speeding up the deportation process. Again, keep in mind, much of this work is just completely self-directed. They're setting these goals for themselves and then sort of telling ICE how they can be achieved. Right. Now, this, especially like the curtailing due process part, was apparently unpalatable even to ICE employees. So a lot of it didn't end up getting implemented. But the point is that it's what McKinsey jumped to in order to save a little bit of money for the agency. Less food, less medical care, shittier facilities for people being detained against their will for the crime of trying to build a better life.
Right.
According to that ProPublica piece I mentioned, quote, these consultants, 3 people who worked on the project, seemed focused solely on cutting costs and speeding up deportations, activities whose success could be measured in numbers, with little acknowledgement that these policies affected thousands of human beings. So just total detachment. Apparent even to the people who are working at ICE, who I assume themselves are probably not that empathetic to the plight
Fucking
of
sickos.
undocumented. Yeah. And like I said, McKinsey has vocally denied that they did any of this for some reason, despite the obvious documented evidence. And they've also defended against this idea specifically that they were trying to facilitate meeting Trump's guidance under the executive orders that he issued. One spokesman said, quote, the scope of our work, contractually agreed to during the Obama administration, was designed to help the agency find ways to operate more effectively and cost efficiently. The focus of our work did not change as a result of these executive orders. The assertion that McKinsey's work was redirected because of these orders is inaccurate. But if you look at the documents, they specifically reference by name Trump and the executive orders. They reference the hiring quota, for example. And like I said, they mention the expected influx of new detainees that are directly related to the executive orders. It's very clear that they were on top of helping ICE meet these new standards, and it's strange that they would even try to create distance between themselves and these standards when they're trying to essentially write the game plan to implement them. And this isn't even the first time they've worked with a law enforcement agency. They have for decades. In addition to their years-long, supposedly now terminated relationship with ICE, McKinsey offers its services to police departments like the NYPD, for example. Now, they've had an ongoing relationship with McKinsey. It's hard to quantify exactly how much money they've given them, but from what I've found that's publicly available, the relationship goes back to at least the 80s, with McKinsey consulting on various issues related to things like recruitment and even corruption sometimes. And then in 2012, the thing that I was looking into for the show was that they hired McKinsey for about $1 million to help figure out and shape what the agency would look like by 2020. They called this the NYPD 2020 Initiative. The idea was that they would help again with things like recruitment, but also technological innovation and any other kinds of improvements that could be made to operations to make the police department better by 2020. They really wanted to bring the NYPD into the future. Now, I had hoped that this would be a little bit more fruitful, but it's honestly a little bit difficult to track down exactly what came out of this project and even some of the previous projects, because McKinsey was also involved in reviewing the NYPD and FDNY response to 9/11. So a lot of the searches are
God.
They're really flooded with that. And weirdly, it's quite difficult to find anything about the NYPD 2020 initiative itself, other than there was a 13-page report issued in 2012 that resulted in these like weird fluff news articles about a proposed smart car, which appears to not have ever been implemented, but everybody was really excited about it. That was like the main thing that came out of this.
I fucking hate it so much, dude. I fucking hate it so much.
Searching all of like the available New York City databases on nyc.gov for NYPD 2020 doesn't turn up like even a single document about this. Though again, a more general search turns up a lot of reports and studies that McKinsey has generated for the NYPD at other times. So I did actually, and you guys might have seen me asking about this in one of the DMs, I did actually file a FOIL request.
Yes!
Which is, of course, I haven't heard back yet, but that's New York's version of the Freedom of Information Act. It's their Freedom of Information law. And I have not gotten a response as of today, but if I do, I will follow up on what exactly McKinsey did for the NYPD for $1 million, because it doesn't seem like they did fucking anything except issue one 13-page report. Like, I could do that. Give me $1 million.
Look at us fucking gumshoe reporting here, huh? Damn,
So-
I'll do it for 900,000.
I'll do it for $50, please. I'll write a report right now.
Take my report, please.
Please. So, given the dearth of information about what McKinsey suggested for, revamping the department and what the outcome of that was, we just have to look at how the NYPD has evolved over the last 10 years. They've made a lot of innovations in the killing unarmed people space.
Yep.
Arresting protesters, falsifying evidence, illegal surveillance, and of course, in 2020, they deployed the canine murder bot that we all know and love, DigiDog.
Oh, yeah.
I actually didn't know his name was DigiDog.
Is it really?
It is, yeah.
I'm going to name it Did You Kick It Into Traffic?
DigiDead. It's impossible to say which of these McKinsey helped with, of course, but their decades-long relationship with the NYPD surely indicates that they deserve some of the credit. Interestingly, another thing that I noticed when I was searching the NYC databases is that, like, it's not just the NYPD and the fire department that have worked with McKinsey. It's every fucking part of the New York City government. From the comptroller to the Department of Health to transportation, McKinsey has worked with like all of them in some capacity. There's just like hundreds of pages of articles and PDFs on the site. And among those, very closely related to the NYPD, of course, is their work with Rikers Island.
Oh, God.
I'm sure everyone here is familiar with Rikers Island, but for our listeners who aren't, it's like the main jail of New York City. It's an island. It spans over 400 acres, and it has over 100,000 admissions per year, with around 10,000 prisoners on average on any given day. So from 2015 to April 2017, McKinsey was contracted by the New York City Department of Correction to help reduce violence at Rikers Island. The contract fee was $5.9 million initially, and it grew to over $27 million by the time they were done. And this had come on the heels of a bunch of reports in 2014 about a really steep rise in violence at Rikers. Over a period of 2 years, both violence between inmates and use of force by guards had increased by more than 50%. So the U.S. Attorney's Office was talking about taking legal action, and then that resulted in them bringing on McKinsey to see how they could deal with it and what plan they could come up with to improve this. And the plan that they came up with was called Restart. The idea was that they would have this separate set of housing units where they would pilot reforms that might help reduce violence. And a big part of this was an algorithm created by McKinsey, the Housing Unit Balancer, or HUB for short. The algorithm was meant to predict whether inmates might be violent by providing them with a score so they could be distributed across housing units in a way that would hopefully minimize the risk of conflict and therefore, supposedly, the risk of violence.
Oh my God.
By mid-2015, they had around 250 people in these units, and the results were miraculous. According to a ProPublica piece, quote, within weeks, the data showed violence far below the norm. Restart units for higher security inmates, for example, experienced only a single incident in their first few months. Unreformed housing units, by contrast, saw 32 violent episodes over a similar period, end quote. Now, that probably sounds too good to be true. And that's because it is.
Oh, God damn it.
There were two big problems. First, the algorithm, like many others used in jail settings, it was just total bullshit. The algorithm didn't really select the inmates that would be targeted for reform. The Department of Correction and McKinsey worked together to curate a list of quote-unquote acceptable inmates for the program. Inmates that were deemed too problematic were just completely excluded from the beginning. And they weren't just curating who was eligible for the program. DOC employees were manually changing inmate scores in HUB to manipulate whether they'd be included or excluded from the Restart housing units. At one point, after a series of violent incidents involving younger inmates, they just banned every single person from age 18 to 21 from the program.
Jesus.
Now, keep in mind, all the while, they're touting the success of this program and of their algorithm, when really what they're doing is narrowing the scope of the program over and over to sort of force it to work so they can keep expanding the program and keep justifying all the millions of dollars that the city is putting into this.
Right.
By the time officials were questioning whether the program actually worked, McKinsey and DOC were claiming that violence at Rikers had been reduced by 70%. The real numbers system-wide didn't match up with that. Violence between inmates and use of force by guards had gone up by 25%, even on top of the previous 50%. So I said a minute ago, there were two big problems. First, that bullshit algorithm. Second, they were just straight up lying. They were making shit up. The numbers and the little progress updates and data sets that they were providing to the city were all seemingly wrong. They had pumped up the baseline numbers from the start to make the supposed reduction in violence in the Restart units look even better than it already was through their manipulation of the inmate population. Internally, officials were starting to doubt the entire data set, and investigations revealed that it was pretty likely that a lot of it was just straight up made up or manipulated so much by McKinsey that it was just meaningless. Over those 3 years, things at Rikers had gotten much worse, and McKinsey had scammed almost $30 million out of the city for the privilege of making sure conditions for inmates didn't improve.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
What the fuck?
As you guys probably know, in March 2017, the mayor announced that Rikers was going to close. And I believe it'll be closed and replaced by 2026, I think.
Yeah, we'll see what fucking RoboCop has to say about it.
Yeah. But anyway, McKinsey's contract was up the next month on April 30th, and it was not extended for obvious reasons. But start to finish, McKinsey claims that their data was good, the program was a success, and if anything, they seem to blame the corrections department for abandoning their fake algorithm and fake data.
I fucking hate it so fucking much.
The entire time, even after de Blasio announced that Rikers would close, McKinsey continued to try to offer its services and make suggestions about the ways it might help. Now, I believe I read that this was the first time McKinsey had worked directly within the prison system. So I looked into it a little bit, and it definitely wasn't the last. In the last couple of years, McKinsey has collected millions of dollars from the Georgia Department of Corrections for consulting with them on privatizing all health care within their prison system in order to cut costs.
Oh my God.
You gotta cut costs. The work continues. And as I wrap up here, I want to go back to a point I was talking about earlier when I was talking about the ERO stuff. The key thing here is just how absolutely detached from reality a lot of this is. Detached from the humanity of undocumented immigrants and incarcerated people, detached from how police departments function and the harm they cause, and at times detached from reality to the point of simply making up numbers. And to illustrate some of this, I want to briefly mention Intel Watch. This was another tool that they tried to sell to Rikers, and it was meant to predict propensity for violence and help do that curation that we talked about before the hub would then decide where inmates would be placed. Obviously, this is a nightmare app that should not exist. I believe in the end, Rikers ended up rejecting it just because it was dog shit, even to people who thought a tool like this would not be evil. But in any case, I'm going to read off a list of inmates that are named here, having been analyzed and curated for their eligibility to get into those restart units. And I want you to tell me if you recognize these names. Shane, I'm looking at you specifically. Stop me when you get it.
Okay.
So it lists the name of a gang, and then it says members. Amsterdam Valen, William Tweed, Johnny Sirocco,
I was gonna make a joke about
Priest
this.
Valent.
This is
Why don't
gangs
you
in
tell
New
us
York.
if-
That's
Yes.
the Dead Rabbit gang from New York.
Yes.
From New York.
These are all characters from gangs in New York. These are all mixed up with what appear to be real names that I didn't read out for obvious
the
reasons.
I was literally when you were talking about how McKinsey has its fingers and everything. I was gonna say we should cut in, and maybe we can cut it in here now. The line when Bill the Butcher is like trying to intimidate Boss Tweed, and he's like I outstretch my hand, and then when I close my fist, it becomes a fist that I can use to help or harm you, Mr. Tweed.
Wow.
If we can
Wow.
cut that in somewhere.
Each of the 5 points is a finger. When I close my hand, it becomes a fist. And any time that I wish, I can turn it against you.
Your Roman popery! Just put that halfway through, yeah.
Duchesne saying it, not the guy from the movie. Okay, yeah. So that's obviously very funny, but it's also really grim. It's
Yes,
they
yeah.
gave these guys aliases based on gangs in New York, and it's again indicative of how this is all just really kind of a game to them. They don't view these incarcerated people as people worthy of getting the opportunity to be a part of reform initiatives, or really as people at all. At the end of the day, it's purely just a numbers game to them. And I want to wrap up my part here by saying that a lot of what I've talked about was directly related to practices that are already completely evil and broken before McKinsey even becomes involved.
Right.
When I talk about incarcerated people or things like prison operations, I'm not talking about it in a neutral way to begin with. And I think it's important to point that out because McKinsey is part of the machine that sometimes facilitates, sometimes simply pretends to facilitate the operations of some of the most sinister parts of the carceral state. And at all times, their primary goal is, of course, to profit off of it. They're just as much a threat as any cop or ICE agent because their job is to look at somebody who's made a mistake in their life or someone who's undocumented and ask, how do we make money off of your life being ruined?
Damn.
And with that in mind, I think we can get into another horrific thing they've profited off of with Chris.
Before we do,
Seamless transition.
I wanted to say again, like when you were talking about like, you know, McKinsey like having like you know, whatever, this like nebulous unknown entity deal engagement whatever with the NYPD and all the other things that it has. Just imagine like just the combination of like the weird sicko mentality of like the long socks and like then like and the brutal club wielding like morons of the NYPD and just like a group of like just no neck Jimmies like
it's a
standing
recipe for
around
perfect evil.
being like, all right, everybody gather around. So in our preparations to enact 9/11/2, we've brought in one of the whiz kids from McKinsey, and here he is now. And then like a fucking like a Pete Campbell-esque guy from Mad Men is like, hiya, fellas. Well, we just think that 9/11/2 is swell, and we can't wait to help you. And they have all these like, here's some literature, and it's like, we don't read. All right, just show us pictures.
This kid sent me a fucking slide deck, like in a fucking binder, like I was gonna crack that shit. This little fucking.
He sent me a slide deck, and I started dealing it. Hey, yo.
This kid came in with a fucking bow tie on. Are you fucking kidding me? What is this kid? This kid coming in. This kid looks like he was at Timothy's first fucking communion, like sitting in the fucking front pew. Are you fucking kidding? This kid came in with a fucking IBM ThinkPad the size of my freaking briefcase. Like, fuck.
Well, we better give him $1 million. It sounded convincing to me, whatever he was saying. A lot of $5 words. Joe College over here.
Hey, let me ask you a question. I mean, on the, you know, just between us, you know, in the engagement, the management consultant and me, you know, a guy with a extremely thick neck. Hey, let me ask you, how much do you make? How much do you really make per year? Because my daughter, she was trying to be an LPN, but like things ain't working out so well for her. Community college, and I was just wondering, you know, she's pretty cute, you know, whatever, and you seem like a nice enough guy.
just imagine like a business lunch between like what was the fucking name of the guy, Carrie, that was on the John Tobacco show, the guy who looked like fucking Kingpin.
Oh god,
you know, just like the big fat lawyer guy sitting across from like a McKinsey guy, and the McKinsey guy again is like, well, like this is swell. I'm gonna and like the entire time he's doing his pitch, the Kingpin guy just keeps interrupting him, going like, "You gonna eat that? Can I have that?" He's just like taking the food off his plate. She's like, "Can I have that? Is that up for grabs?"
This kid came up here saying how he was able to do this using a fucking VLOOKUP or some bullshit. I have no idea what the fuck he's talking about.
Oh, a VLOOKUP. I got one of those from my back.
I got it. It's Lou Gelormino. If anybody wants to. I'm gonna send a picture of this guy to the chat so you guys can see what's happening.
This kid came up to me and said that he was able to do this using the concatenate function on Excel, which I told him I had on my 385 cubic inch Dodge Dart in 1972. I had a concatenator in the engine.
The first picture you sent, Carrie. I know this is a little bit off the beaten track.
I love his his like fucking Dick Tracy villain henchman.
That's John Tobacco, and he looks so sad.
Yeah, it's a great jacket.
Maybe that's what he was apologizing.
Oh, dude, this is in front of Max Tavern.
Yeah.
This is in front of I know because I've been there.
The title of that, the headline on that is "Cop hit by SI bar owner's car, didn't break legs, attorney." So I guess that's Lou Gelormino saying he didn't even break his legs. What's the big deal?
I mean, for the record, like I remember I was once walking on like 41st Street, like, and right in front of and 5th Avenue, like right in front of the New York Public Library there. And I remember seeing a guy that came out of like a Mercedes S-Class, like, you know, one of the really nice like big sedans or whatever, and wearing a suit and had a gun and a badge on him. And I remember thinking like, these are the NYPD guys that are like, you know, they've been in the fucking thing for, you know, since they were kids, and they're connected or whatever. And this is like, these are the stakeholders that like decide to like hire McKinsey to fucking bail them out of this bullshit or whatever. But again, like, let me slow down there. Almost fucking busted gut. Jesus. Like, exactly as you're describing, Carrie, like, half of the reason I'm convinced that like McKinsey or other management consultants of their ilk, like fucking, you know, Price Waterhouse and Boston Consulting Group and all that stuff, are hired to outsource that cruelty, so that they aren't the ones making like the decisions, but they know, like, well, my job is to do the capital efficiency here, right? But it's just I know that there's some weird nebulous ways to do this, and let's hire McKinsey or, you know, something of the like to be able to make those decisions. And guess what? They're the ones that make the recommendations, and they're the smart ones that know how to do all the things. And, you know, I want to and we need to do that now that they told us we have to do it. What the fuck is this?
Oh my god, I just saw what you linked, Shane.
Yeah, I guess McKinsey were one of many corporate sponsors for the NYPD 2019 gala.
Wonderful.
Fucking of course it was.
Or no, wait, this is the New York City Police Foundation. Oh, that's good.
I mean, they run a lot of the shit.
Hey, listen, Mr. Kinsey, let me ask you a question. Listen, we're putting this little ballroom together, you know what I'm saying? And we're looking for some gold and silver level sponsors for this thing. You know, I've thrown you a lot of work this year. Why don't you see it clear to throw us a little check, maybe $15,000 or whatever. I'll make sure. I know you and Janice can come up and you guys can sit down. It'd be a nice affair. We're gonna have stuffed shells and shit. I made sure I talked to the caterer the other day and I got him to get some Yingling because I know you like it. So why don't we just send a check over? Can you?
100% chance that's exactly how it went.
I just imagine. Sorry, in my head, again, the McKinsey guy is like Pete Campbell from Mad Men, and I'm just imagining now he's trying
like the guy like the Book of Mormon actors. Really enthusiastic.
And I'm just imagining seeing it. It's like they're like setting up for the gala, and the McKinsey guys are like, you know, there to like, you know, whatever, to make sure all their money is being well spent. They walk in, and there's just like one of like a Lou Guillermino guy just like eating like every hot dog that's on the table. He goes like, "Hey, how's it going? How you doing?" And then the McKinsey guy goes, "Not great, Bob." All right. We've been milking this one.
I know.
Too long.
Okay, but really,
we've been Michael milking this one.
I will let Chris get to his part, but I just have to say, we had this thing that I've linked in our Discord. We have got to watch this because Big Lou Guillermino was in a reality show.
No
in
way.
2014, there's one season. It only costs $8 to buy it. Okay, and
let's do it.
Is he the
we
star?
have to do it. Yes, him and his partner Mario Gallucci. They're America's most colorful criminal defense attorney.
I wonder why Gallucci is not on Wise Guys. I wonder if Guillermino and Gallucci had a falling out.
Maybe they had a falling out. They do bicker like brothers, according to the show description. So
they bicker like brothers. Oh, that's
maybe
sweet.
They had a falling out. Okay, all right, that's it. I'm gonna shut up now.
All right. So for my part, we're gonna get a little bit into some of McKinsey's more recent activity, where they were have come on board to help advise Purdue Pharmaceuticals in how they can shore up business and expand the reach of their products and increase profits and all that sort of stuff. The product in question here is OxyContin. That's the product in question. And by the time that McKinsey came on board, Purdue was already very much like in shit about their very aggressive sales of OxyContin. But McKinsey advised Purdue Pharmaceuticals and the Sackler family personally for years on marketing their OxyContin painkillers. And first of all, we've talked about the Sackler family before, but the Sackler family controlled Purdue fully. Like, not only is just like the they weren't just the owners; they were like the sole owners, but like also members of the boards and acting as executives. And they were very hands on in what Purdue Pharmaceuticals was doing. And McKinsey was there too, from as early as 2009. But really picking up in 2010, McKinsey was advising them. And but keep in mind, by this time, by 2007, in 2007, Purdue pleaded guilty in federal court to criminal charges that they'd misled regulators and doctors and patients and all this stuff about the misleading people about the drugs' risk of addiction and potential to be abused. They'd already agreed to pay a $600 million fine, and McKinsey was obviously very well aware of all of this when they came on board to help them. OxyContin has a longer lasting time release formula, and Purdue initially advertised it as having a lower threat of abuse and addiction potential than typical shorter acting painkillers like Percocet and Vicodin and stuff like this. And that claim was a really central part of what would be like the most aggressive marketing campaign ever undertaken by a pharmaceutical company for a narcotic painkiller.
Right.
And so by just a few years after the drug's introduction in 1996, its annual sales had already reached, in excess of $1 billion. And Purdue very heavily promoted OxyContin to doctors like general practitioners who often may have had little training in the treatment of serious pain disorders or recognizing signs of drug abuse in patients. We all know what comes next. What comes next with that? So this is OxyContin's been on the market for 13, 14 years. People are very well aware of the damage that's been done. And so this is when McKinsey first comes on board in 2009. And that's what they were really brought on board about, was to sort of help Purdue repair their image and move past this scandal, but also to help make sure that they're also able to keep making record profits with OxyContin, because they were by no means going to stop selling OxyContin. And McKinsey consultants really went above and beyond with Purdue. They would ride along with Purdue sales representatives when they would go out to meet with doctors' offices so that they could critique them on how effectively they were selling OxyContin.
Jesus.
They proposed giving rebates to pharmacies when their customers overdosed. They advised Purdue on how to avoid FDA and pharmacy restrictions. In 2013, McKinsey proposed what they called Project Turbocharge. This was their plan to turbocharge sales of OxyContin, as they put it. And just a few examples of some of the stuff that they did with Purdue, and a lot of this is coming from. So they're just last year, McKinsey reached a $573 million agreement with attorneys general in 47 states. About the work that they did. Consulting about their role in the opioid crisis, not just with Purdue, mostly with Purdue, but they also consulted with other drug manufacturers who were selling prescription opioids. And reading a little bit from this, this is the complaint from the state of New York, but this has got some of the information outlined in here. Some of the work that McKinsey did directly with Purdue. And they were brought on specifically. One of the things they were doing in 2012 was to, help devise additional marketing and sales strategies for Purdue to continue selling OxyContin and to, in fact, increase sales in OxyContin after all the negative press they'd gotten, I guess. And reading from this document here, this is some of the advice that McKinsey had for Purdue. It says, McKinsey told Purdue that, quote, there is a significant opportunity to slow the decline of OxyContin by calling on more high-value physicians, and that the revenue upside from sales retargeting and adherence could be up to $250 million. Also, as part of the Project Turbocharge recommendations, McKinsey determined and advised Purdue that the top half of prescribing physicians, quote, write on average 25 times more scripts per prescriber than the lower half. McKinsey advised Purdue that visiting high-prescribing doctors many times per year increased sales. McKinsey also recommended increasing incentive compensation for incremental OxyContin prescribers, advising Purdue that, quote, revision to incentive comp could better align reps to Purdue's economics. At the same time, McKinsey recommended decreasing training by 6 days a year in order to allow employees more time to make sales calls. Meanwhile, McKinsey
Wow.
advised Purdue to exercise closer control over its sales staff in order to generate more efficient physician targeting. McKinsey knew that combined with the strictures of sales quotas and less training for the sales force, bonus incentive compensation to the sales representatives based on the number of OxyContin prescriptions the representative produced could be a powerful driver of incremental OxyContin sales. McKinsey also recommended that Purdue circumvent pharmacies entirely with a mail order program because enforcement by federal regulators was decreasing OxyContin dispensing through Walgreens. At the board level, McKinsey urged the Sacklers to impose, quote, revenue growth goal on management. The Sacklers were impressed with McKinsey's work. On August 15, 2013, Richard Sackler emailed Mortimer D.A. Sackler, quote, the discoveries of McKinsey are astonishing. In September, this would have been September 2013, Purdue began to implement Project Turbocharge based on McKinsey's recommendation. In adopting Project Turbocharge, Purdue acknowledged the improper connotations of the name, and they changed it and rebranded it to they renamed it quote Evolve to Excellence. That was their name of their project to increase OxyContin sales. And the Sacklers were, again, it's like I said, they're very hands-on. They were kept informed. They knew everything that was going on.
Right.
At in a September 2013 board meeting, the board discussed with the Sacklers the ongoing implementation of McKinsey's recommendations, and McKinsey's efforts had the effect the Sacklers had asked McKinsey to achieve, because sales of OxyContin tripled in the years following that 2007 guilty plea.
Jesus
Wow.
Christ.
And, here's more on that. In 2007, the year of Purdue's guilty plea, net sales of OxyContin totaled approximately $1 billion. The guilty plea did little to stem Purdue's blistering growth rate. In fact, by 2010, as a result of McKinsey's advice and active assistance to Purdue and the Sacklers, OxyContin sales exceeded $3 billion.
My God.
McKinsey worked with Purdue. Part of their advice was to focus on selling the more lucrative high-dose pills, like the 80 milligram pills of OxyContin. McKinsey consultants told Purdue that it could, quote, band together with other opioid makers to head off, quote, strict treatment by the FDA, and worked with the company on ways to, quote, counter the emotional messages from mothers with teenagers that overdosed on OxyContin.
Oh my God. And isn't that just like fucking collusion? Like working with other manufacturers? I guess not.
Yeah,
that's
solid. That's solidarity.
Yeah.
That's solidarity.
Only if it's price fixing. If you're just conspiring to kill people, it's okay.
Right.
But a little bit more about the settlement itself, and I'll go into a little bit more of some of the details here. I'm going to read a little bit directly from this New York Times article about this from last year, called "McKinsey Settles for Nearly $600 Million Over Rolling Opioid Crisis." Reading from this directly, the consulting firm will not admit wrongdoing according to the multi-state settlement, but will agree to court-ordered restrictions on its work with some types of addictive narcotics. McKinsey will also retain emails for 5 years and disclose potential conflicts of interest when bidding for state contracts. And in a move similar to the tobacco industry settlements decades ago, it will put tens of thousands of pages of documents related to its opioid work onto a publicly available database. States will use the civil penalties, $478 million of which must be paid within 60 days, for opioid treatment, prevention, and recovery programs. We'll get back to that. It will be the first money states will see after Purdue Pharma in October of 2020 agreed to pay $8.3 billion and plead guilty to federal criminal charges over its marketing of OxyContin. Purdue declared bankruptcy, meaning the state's party to that agreement will have to line up with other creditors. In addition to the money that Purdue had to pay as a company, members of the Sackler family also agreed to pay $225 million in civil penalties. They're in talks with other litigants. This is as of 2021 to pay $3 billion. McKinsey has released a statement saying that they believe that all the work that they did with Purdue was lawful. They've denied any sort of allegations to the contrary. And the settlement itself is significant because it sort of shatters this illusion of distance that McKinsey likes to put between itself and its clients, right? Like that they're only there to make recommendations, right? And for decades,
right.
That's how they've sort of avoided legal liability for high profile failures of some of its clients, like Enron. Also, Swiss Air, which was Switzerland's now defunct national airline that went bankrupt in 2002. McKinsey helped, consult them all the way through driving them into bankruptcy. But in recent years,
really
McKinsey has taken a lot more of an aggressive role, specifically with Purdue, and not only offering management advice, but also helping the companies implement their suggestions. Going back to the article here, this is what happened with McKinsey at Purdue, said Phil Weiser, the Attorney General for Colorado. 2 McKinsey senior partners led the firm's effort to implement plans to drive sales, working with members of the Sackler family and even overruling Purdue's executives. Quote, when you see the actions of these McKinsey partners, they were almost acting as executives of the firm, Mr. Weiser said. The McKinsey material
That's
released...
that's like
ahead.
super similar to what we were learning in the Enron portion of it.
Yeah.
Which is like, they were just like, they had their hands in everything. Even if they weren't like, had an official board seat or executive position, this is just, and the same deal with the fucking ICE thing, right? It's just like, who's calling the shots?
Yeah, exactly. A few more of their greatest hits with the firm over the years. In 2009, the firm wrote a report. McKinsey wrote a report for Purdue saying that new sales tactics would increase sales of OxyContin by as much as $400 million annually, and suggested, quote, sales drivers based on the idea that opioids reduce stress and make patients more optimistic and less isolated. According to the lawsuit filed in 2018 in Massachusetts. McKinsey worked with, I mentioned this quote a minute ago, but McKinsey worked with Purdue executives in finding ways, as they said, to, quote, counter the emotional messages from mothers with teenagers that overdosed on the drug. And their idea for that was to essentially offer rebates to pharmacies for every OxyContin overdose attributable to the pills that they had sold.
Fucking twisted.
And they had this was like a slideshow presentation that they gave to Purdue, where in this slideshow they estimated that 2,484 CVS customers would overdose or develop an opioid use disorder in 2019 from taking OxyContin. A rebate of $14,810 per event. That's their term for the overdoses events. Meant that Purdue would pay CVS $36.8 million that year. CVS has said that this plan was never implemented. This was something that this was a bright idea that one of the McKinsey consultants had. And by 2018, senior executives at McKinsey were already becoming very well aware that they could potentially face liability for their work with Purdue and their work with opioids. Two partners in particular, Martin Elling and Arnab Ghatak. This is sort of funny. I like this here. One of them. This is an email that Elling wrote to Ghatak. Quote: it probably makes sense to have a quick conversation with the risk committee to see if we should be doing anything other than eliminating all our documents and emails. Suspect not.
My God.
But as things get tougher, someone might turn to us. It's just, that's funny to me. Just like that, sort of criminal, destroying evidence, but also put in that corporate speak.
Yeah.
We need to speak with the crimes steering committee to see what they want us to do about destroying this evidence.
Brazen.
Jesus fucking Christ.
God.
Both of those guys were at first put on administrative leave and then eventually fired by McKinsey. They were among the highest ranking consultants at McKinsey. 5 years earlier, documents show that they emailed colleagues about a meeting in which McKinsey persuaded the Sacklers to aggressively market OxyContin. Quote, the meeting went very well. The room was filled with only family, including the elder statesman, Dr. Raymond, wrote Mr. Ghatak, referring to Purdue's co-founder, the physician Raymond Sackler, who would die in 2017.
God. Rest in piss, asshole.
Yeah, fuck off.
Mr. Elling concurred, quote, by the end of the meeting, he wrote, the findings were crystal clear to everyone, and they gave a ringing endorsement of moving forward fast. Now, that $600 that I mentioned that McKinsey's agreed to pay, like I said, would be largely going to state programs funding addiction treatment centers and recovery services and stuff like that. Luckily for McKinsey, they may have a chance to recoup some of that money because they have their fingers in the that side of the treatment side of the opioid crisis as well.
Sure.
Vertical integration, exactly.
Oh,
but this is through their hedge fund. Like it's a wholly owned affiliate of McKinsey. It's their hedge fund affiliate, MIO Partners. Holds stakes in addiction treatment centers and also the makers of overdose treatment products. Since 2010, a retirement fund managed by MIO amassed a $108 million stake in a company called Deerfield Management Company, which is a healthcare investment firm. Two former consultants at McKinsey are now went on to be executives at Deerfield. And McKinsey's hedge fund MIO has invested with Deerfield, has taken on large stakes in these opioid manufacturers, in distribution of the drugs in addiction treatment facilities, right? So, for example, in 2017, Deerfield was a 6% stakeholder in another pharmaceutical company called Mallinckrodt, a major opioid maker, filed for bankruptcy protection after its legal liabilities for its role in the opioid crisis. From 2011 through 2016, Deerfield held a stake valued at $90 million in Teva Pharmaceuticals, an opioid maker and defendant in the opioid litigation. In 2019, Deerfield also took stakes in two distribution companies ensnared in government-led opioid litigation, McKesson and Cardinal Health. In 2017, Deerfield management agreed to pay $4.7 million to settle charges by the Securities and Exchange Commission that it had profited in trades while failing to prevent its employees from misusing material non-public information. The agency alleged that Deerfield had received non-public information about coming policy changes at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services and generated over $700,000 in profits. Adamus Pharmaceuticals, a company that develops products to treat opioid overdoses, may also benefit from these opioid settlement funds. MIO owns 26% of the company's preferred shares, which is a stake that was purchased through an outside investment manager.
Because they don't do their own investment. They're like almost like a hedge fund of funds or something like that, where they have the third parties do the actual transactions.
There's another one called Recovery Centers of America, which is an addiction treatment company in which Deerfield management invested $331 million in 2015 and 2016. They operate addiction treatment facilities in Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, all states that were part of the McKinsey settlement. And what's more than this is that there's like serious conflicts of interests, serious conflict of interest concerns with some of McKinsey's consultants that were working with Purdue. One example is this guy named Jeff Smith, who was a partner with McKinsey and Company. He started on an assignment with Purdue in December 2017. By this time, the company was in financial trouble. They were looking for help revamping their business. This guy, the McKinsey consultant, he traveled to Purdue's corporate offices in Stamford, Connecticut. He met with executives and dined with executives. His team reviewed business plans and evaluated new drugs that Purdue hoped would be they would be moving into the market that would help kind of move the company beyond the trouble associated with OxyContin. This was not Jeff Smith's only assignment at the time. He also happened to be helping the FDA overhaul its office that approves new drugs, which was the very same office that would be the very same regulatory body that would be in charge of determining the fate of Purdue's new line of proposed products that he was simultaneously advising them on. And this was not an isolated incident. So they were allowing consultants who were working with pharmaceutical companies like Purdue to simultaneously consult for the FDA, which is the drug industry's primary government regulator.
Right. And
like I said, this is not an isolated incident. In fact, not only that, they would tout this inside access in their pitches to prospective pharmaceutical company clients. They would brag about these connections they have to the FDA and to government agencies.
Of course.
And this is just reading a little bit here. This is from an article from April of this year, actually just recently. This is called McKinsey Opened a Door in Its Firewall Between Pharma Clients and Regulators. This is also from the New York Times. In an email in 2014 to Purdue's chief executive, a McKinsey consultant highlighted the firm's work for the FDA and stressed, quote, who we know, and what we know. Since 2010, at least 22 McKinsey consultants have worked for both Purdue and the FDA, some at the same time.
Wow, holy shit.
The firm never provided any evidence.
How is that possible?
A really long sock.
Yeah. Well, apparently they're not conflicts of interest. Is what they're.
It's actually normal.
That's what they've been maintained. Yeah, it's totally normal. But yeah, at least 22 McKinsey consultants, worked for Purdue and the FDA at the same time. Worked for Purdue and the FDA, some at the same time.
That's really fucking insane, man.
The firm never provided any evidence at all to the committee that it disclosed these conflicts of interest, which of course is going to be required by federal law. McKinsey also allowed employees advising Purdue to help shape materials that were intended for government officials and agencies, including a memo in 2018 prepared for Alex Azar, then the incoming Secretary of Health and Human Services under President Donald Trump. References to the severity of the opioid crisis in a draft version of the memo were cut before it was sent to Mr. Azar.
What? That's so fucking sick.
McKinsey said that its consultants are forbidden to share confidential information or discuss their work with clients that have competing interests. And in a statement, the a spokesman for the company disputed that there was any disclosure requirement to the work that they've done with the FDA. Quote, since McKinsey has not advised the FDA on specific regulatory decisions or on specific pharmaceutical products, our consulting engagements with pharmaceutical companies did not create conflict of interest with McKinsey's consulting work for the FDA, the spokesman said.
For sure, man.
Because there was not a conflict of interest, there was not a requirement for a disclosure. It's as simple as that.
Simple as that. Isn't that lucky?
Yeah, McKinsey's own company guidelines for dealing with conflicts of interest for government work, which are based on the federal rules say that even the appearance of a conflict of interest compels the consultant to disclose them, right, to just avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest.
Yes,
that's McKinsey's own policy. The committee identified 37 FDA projects staffed by McKinsey consultants who also worked for Purdue. Additional documents suggesting that McKinsey's work for the agency, including by Dr. Smith, that's the Jeff Smith, the McKinsey consultant I mentioned a second ago, was even more extensive. Dr. Smith worked on more than 40 projects for the FDA between 2007 and 2019, while also serving Purdue in at least half a dozen initiatives.
Unreal.
Advising the drug maker on interactions with the regulator, and in one case, helping secure approval of a new opioid product, according to the documents obtained by the attorneys general. The documents also identified other McKinsey consultants who both worked with the FDA and advised drug makers on regulatory issues. Najat Singh, a partner, led more than 80 McKinsey projects at the agency between 2007 and 2019. Emails and presentations from that period show that he was also working on multiple projects for Purdue. The McKinsey team advising Purdue solicited his insight in an email discussing, quote, FDA issues, and the firm in 2014 offered him to Purdue as an expert in regulatory agencies. Several of McKinsey's FDA projects pertained directly to work the firm was doing for Purdue at the same time. In 2011, the FDA hired McKinsey to advise its office overseeing drug companies' plans to monitor the safety of potentially risky products like opioids. Dr. Smith worked on the project while also advising Purdue on an effort that would, among other things, demonstrate whether OxyContin was meeting those requirements. In 2016, while Dr. Smith advised the FDA on its use of data for tracking drug safety, colleagues sought his counsel on how the firm might draw on that work with the agency to help Purdue. The documents indicate multiple occasions when McKinsey promoted its connections with federal regulators while pitching its services to pharmaceutical clients. Quote, we serve the broadest range of stakeholders that matter for Purdue, one consultant, Rob Roselio, wrote in a 2014 email to Purdue's chief executive. He added, one client we can disclose is the FDA, who we have supported for over 5 years. Earlier in a 2019 presentation offering its services to a pharmaceutical industry group, McKinsey wrote that directly supported regulatory bodies, quote, and as such have developed insights into the perspective of the regulators themselves. More recently, McKinsey also sought to cultivate closer ties to Mr. Azar from the Health and Human Services, who was nominated in 2017 by Mr. Trump to be the nation's top health official. Reading from the article here, McKinsey collected at least $400 million advising pharmaceutical companies in 2018 and 2019, according to its internal records. The firm's relationship with Mr. Azar began well before his appointment. In February 2017, Mr. Azar, who had just left his job as he was the president of the drug maker Eli Lilly's U.S. office or whatever. He emailed another partner who had led the firm's work with Purdue, and here's a quote from that email. I'd really value sitting with you guys and talking through ideas you may have and advice on how to look at and for opportunities, Mr. Azar wrote to Mr. Elling. Other emails show that Mr. Elling and others at McKinsey has scheduled a meeting with Mr. Azar at the firm's Midtown Manhattan office on May 1st, 2017. Later, upon learning of Mr. Azar's Senate confirmation in January 2018, Mr. Elling, and Elling is one of the guys that was one of the most senior ones who was McKinsey had to fire as a sacrificial lamb, basically. But after Azar's Senate confirmation, he wrote an email to him that said, "One giant step, congratulations." Mr. Azar replied, "Thanks, guys. Very grateful for all your help. Let me get my sea legs over there and we can chat about the practice and connections to HHS." So basically, they really sort of... It's as if they sort of helped him and prepared him and sort of groomed him for this role. Sure. And this is a funny quote here. The McKinsey spokesman said the firm was, quote, not aware that it played any role helping Mr. Azar get nominated for his cabinet post.
Unreal.
McKinsey consultants had begun drafting a detailed memo to Mr. Azar right before his confirmation, the documents show, in which they outlined major issues he would face. One paragraph offered a blunt assessment of the continued severity of the opioid crisis. It said that 2 programs that he would be overseeing as secretary, Medicare and Medicaid, were contributing to the problem by allowing opioids to be dispensed to people prone to abuse and in doses that would be too high for them.
Jesus.
I think we talked about that. I remember when that came out. I remember when that was first said.
I just want to jump in really quick.
Please.
I looked up one of the names that you were mentioning, Rob Rosilio.
Yeah, I was reading that too.
I found this article from Forbes. This is from 2016. The most thankless executive job in America, chief financial officer of Valiant Pharmaceuticals.
Boo.
So I guess Rob Rosilio became CFO of Valiant Pharmaceuticals, and it also mentions here he was on the board of the Catholic Charities of New York.
Nice.
Wow. Not very Christ-like, asshole.
Oh, yeah. Here's another good one. Here's some more funny OPSEC stuff. In 2018, McKinsey senior partner Tom Latkovic and his colleagues prepared publications with titles such as, quote, "Why We Need Bolder Action to Combat the Opioid Epidemic." Drafts were sent for review to other McKinsey consultants serving pharmaceutical companies. Quote, "We really want to make sure you are comfortable with the content and that you don't feel your respective clients would be concerned in any way," one manager wrote, when soliciting feedback from 2 consultants who had worked with opioid manufacturers. Mr. Latkovic complained in an email that one colleague working with the drug makers always waters down what I say. As Purdue's legal troubles festered, McKinsey partners overseeing the firm's work with the opioid maker appear to have taken steps to limit material that could be subpoenaed. In one text message exchange with Mr. Goddick in 2017, one of the other partners here said, quote, "These guys will be deposed," she wrote, talking about Purdue. Best our emails not get sucked into it. In late August 2018, after Massachusetts and New York had already sued Purdue over its marketing of opioid products, that guy Elling, the senior consultant, he wrote an email to himself that said, "Delete old Purdue documents from laptop." Which I just love.
Do crime.
Yeah, and then immediately delete this email.
High priority.
You get a Google Calendar notification that's reminder, your crimes are due in 5 minutes.
It's crime o'clock.
You sent me something, Shane, that was funny. I wanted to touch on this real quick, and because I guess that's sort of it for the Purdue and the Sackler part of it. But I wanted to mention, I guess not everything that McKinsey does is awful.
Go ahead.
and like reading.
I know where you're going.
Reading
with
reading the headline here: spies fear a consulting firm helped hobble U.S. intelligence. This is from
Yes.
Politico in
shit.
Politico in 2019. And it's funny because like I read this article and I read another article about it, and it's like hard to even find out exactly what all these guys are complaining about. But basically, like the CIA and the United States, fucking the deep state and intelligence agencies and all that shit was the spying apparatus. This is all sort of built around the Cold War, right? And the world is changing, and deep state sickos need to adapt to keep up.
The world is changing.
So they bring in McKinsey to help them like restructure the country's spying bureaucracy, like with the idea, the goal of improving response times and smoothing communication or whatever. And reading directly from the Political article here, it says, instead, according to nearly a dozen current and former officials who either witnessed the restructuring firsthand or are familiar with the project, the multi-million-dollar overhaul has left many within the country's intelligence agencies demoralized and less effective.
Shall we?
Yeah, these insiders said the effects have hindered decision-making at key agencies, including the CIA, National Security Agency, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Yeah, apparently they were paid. It's unclear exactly how much they were paid in total. It's at least $10 million that they were paid for the work with the CIA and the NSA and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And there's like several quotes from different different people in these firms like complaining about the results. First of all, some of the a lot of these contracts were awarded without any sort of like competitive bidding process. A move which, like McKinsey says, I guess is like they're supposed to speed up the timelines or whatever. Basically, a lot of these people's complaint is that like McKinsey just like shows up with like the same fucking like cookie cutter advice and like ideas, like no matter what the company is, like doesn't actually like tailor them to the company at all.
Right.
Apparently, that's what these guys are saying here. The result, analysts, and this is a direct quote, the result, analysts and agents said, is that some officials are being frustrated in their attempts to battle increasingly swift and complex threats. And I'm doing, like, as I read this, I'm doing, like, the fucking, like, air jack-off motion, like, so hard that I'm dislocating my wrist. Russia is launching disinformation campaigns that reach thousands of people in seconds on social media. Iran is hammering oil and gas companies in cyberspace. Chinese hackers are pilfering government records. Terrorist networks have fractured and retreated to encrypted networks. And North Korea is furtively building out its nuclear program. In each case, bureaucratic changes that slow response time or hamper intelligence collection capabilities would cause the loss of company secrets, private government data, and the democratic process, and even American lives. Already, some projects at the NSA have been cut or delayed as a result of disgruntled employees leaving the agency. Quote, at CIA, they shattered long-standing structural constructs that people had invested their whole careers in, said Larry Pfeiffer, a 32-year intelligence veteran who now serves as the director of the Michael V. Hayden Center for Intelligence, Policy and International Security at George Mason University. It resulted in a, quote, a coordination nightmare, widely considered to be very heavy-handed, added Pfeiffer, who left government before the restructuring but remains in close contact with current officials. Pfeiffer said he doesn't know a soul at the CIA or NSA who would tell you that the reorganizations have made things better. Here's their work with the NSA. The NSA hired McKinsey to help with a restructuring project nicknamed NSA 21. One outcome was to merge the agency's offensive and defensive cybersecurity teams, but the decision exacerbated simmering tensions with the private sector. Pfeiffer said McKinsey complicated this restructuring, pushing changes that led to an overabundance of voices and perceived inefficiencies. And the reorganization made the mission more muddled, former employees said, expressing frustration with the new mission centers that combine the traditionally separate analysts and operators. As a result, some projects intended to make intelligence collection more effective were pushed back or put on ice altogether, the Washington Post reported last year as disgruntled employees left the agency. The CIA, which hired McKinsey in 2015, went through similar changes that irked many at the agency, according to current and former employees. A former senior intelligence official who witnessed CIA's reorganization, for example, said the changes there affected turnaround time for intelligence reports, which is a critical factor in decision-making. He also complained about the newly created mission centers, saying that, ironically, he had great connectivity to analysts before they were forced to share a room. It's become a place there that having meetings passes for making progress. It's so funny that these are all like the most like pissing at like this is what are they complaining about? Like honestly, I'm like, what's the substance of what they're bitching about? But anything that's making the CIA less effective is like a net positive. A net positive.
McKinsey.
We need to GoFundMe. Like we need to crowdsource to hire McKinsey to like just consult for the CIA indefinitely. But they consulted at the NSA, the CIA, also the ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. In all, the firm has secured close to $1 billion in government contracts in just the past 10 years. They worked with the CIA the FBI in 2005. And I was looking I thought there was another quote in here. Are these fucking like deep state sickos bitching? This is where they're bitching about the like the cookie cutter advice that they come in with. They claim to customize, but they don't. The former official said they are extremely formulaic. You can tell that they're following a script. The former McKinsey employee defended the practice.
Like, what do you want? What do you want?
Yeah. I think it's funny that McKinsey like shows up with like the same advice to like the CIA and like as they do to like Coca-Cola or whatever. You know?
Yeah, what does
Right.
that?
Well,
what does that say?
I mean, that goes back to, originally their sort of their
Right.
mission statement, their idea is like, we're going to tackle top level executives and we're going to treat all industries as the same, all businesses as the same, and just create these kind of like blanket cookie cutter ideas and see if we can apply them across the board. And it's like, obviously you can't do that.
Yeah.
Like that's not, I mean, that might be in the sense of like, again, just sort of maximizing short-term profits.
Right.
Sure, there might be some things you can do to everything, but like the goal of a company in terms of, is to make money, but it also is to like create a product versus then if you're talking about like an organization that is like a fucking government organization, the goal isn't to like make money. The goal is to accomplish something.
Right.
It's just it's privileging the idea of like short-term gains and efficiency over everything else, which is again, I mean, very funny when applied to like whatever the CIA. But
that's it. One thing I thought is interesting as well is that I can't remember who said it earlier in the show, but like the closing like line of this article was one of the people they were talking to basically saying that the agencies that McKinsey's brought on so that agency leaders can like outsource tough decisions, right? Like they're like that's the scapegoat for hire. Like you bring them on board. It's like in fucking the movie Office Space. Like remember the guys they bring on board to like lay everybody off. It's like that's McKinsey's real job.
But that's the whole point.
Yeah.
But if it goes well, and you were the executive that hired them, then you're the one that made the smart decision. Actually,
yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of put this together and draw this to a conclusion, like, exactly like you're describing. I mean, the whole point for them to exist is to be, this kind of like turbocharger for capital efficiency. And really, like, again, like if anybody's like met anybody that's been a consultant or whatever, like they're like 24-year-olds that are like straight out of like, prestige small liberal arts colleges or obviously like Ivy Leagues or Stanford and all that stuff.
They're all
like,
made in the same petri dish where they made Pete Buttigieg.
Correct. 100%. Who? Yeah, but of course, if we can't fucking.
What was it that he did?
He did. Wasn't he? Wasn't he involved in some like bread price fixing shit? Yeah.
Yeah. Can we please put that clip in with the dude from the New York Times or whatever saying,
You've been on the front lines of corporate downsizing. You've been on the front lines of corporate price fixing. You've been on the front lines of our misadventures.
I'm sorry,
of our misadventures in foreign policy. You've had direct experience of many of the things that make a lot of young people very angry about the way that this country is operating right now. You don't seem to embody that anger.
So the proposition that I've been on the front lines of corporate price fixing is just to get that out of the way.
You worked for a company that was fixing bread prices.
No. I worked for a consulting company that had a client that may have been involved in fixing, or was apparently in a scandal. I was not aware of the Canadian bread pricing scandal until last night.
It's so good.
Yeah, and you're hired to come in and honestly, like, come to relatively obvious conclusions based off of the data that you get. This is how it works. Like, they give you a data dump, and you're supposed to sift through it and correct the errors, and then interpolate things, and like try to come up with some simple linear regression models and stuff like that, and figure out what story the data is telling.
Have you considered cheating your customers? Have you considered firing a lot of your workforce? You'd make more money now if you fired a bunch of the people you're paying.
I never thought of that.
That's exactly what they're there to do, because these are the
like
things.
A 5-point BuzzFeed listicle on like how to squeeze more pennies out of your customers.
Literally,
it's like a WikiHow article.
Yeah, but the point is like, it's not the executive saying these scary things,
right?
But if the executive just happens to be presented with something that offers capital efficiency or shareholder value, or whatever, and there's a clear roadmap of what the potential consequences may be, and that calculation creates a net benefit, or a net positive or whatever, then you have no choice but to follow that. Remember, because like this is like going back to Eat the Rich's inception, is like to understand that executives, especially for like publicly traded companies, have a fiduciary responsibility, a legal responsibility to create shareholder value. And if you're presented with that, even if it means fucking dumping barrels of benzene into like, fucking nursing homes or whatever the fuck they would come up with, like, but it creates profit and you can get away with it, or you can, pay the little fine that you may have to do. You will do it. Because this third party, who's the gilded, fucking Fauntleroys with bow ties and long socks and no hats after the 60s or whatever the fuck, like it is their job to come up with those seemingly maybe obvious interpolations, but nonetheless the recommendations to create that capital efficiency.
Or they just make stuff up.
It would be so fun. It would be so funny if, like, because they so often, like, are pushing their clients to effectively just do like crimes, but they're often these kind of like white collar crime kind of things. It'd be so funny if they just like they got hired by, I don't know, again, like another police department, and they're like, look, we crunched the numbers. You guys are heavily armed. You should rob banks. If you rob banks, you could get out of there with a lot of cash. It'd be a huge influx of money into your operation. Why not try it?
That is so fucking funny.
Hell, I'm going to try it.
Whoa.
That'll be my consulting firm.
I mean, they literally like just like get hired by pharmaceutical companies to be like, have you guys considered just like selling heroin? It's essentially the work that they did.
You can make so much money doing that.
A thing like that. It's a little another Mad Men reference.
You're such a huge Mad Men head. You're just like all about it.
What can I say?
Mad Men.
It's just end on that. Sing it, baby.
It's a cigarette smoking. Oh, there it is. Yeah. All right, yeah. Keep that going. Do I keep that going now, Chris? Drop some bars.
I've never seen the show. I don't know what's going on.
Oh fuck!
All right, cut it. Just
cut
forget
the whole
it.
thing. Delete the recording of the episode.
No. Actually, cut Dwight rapping. Do not include Dwight rapping. That's not a joke.
That's illegal.
Bleep it if you want, but just cut it. Get it out of here.
All right, folks. McKinsey sucks.
Just cut from
anything
we were
that I
singing
say.
the song
anything
and it was
that
fun.
I try to say.
And now we're just gonna wrap it up. Literally, just cut all that. Don't include this. Please do not include this. It's not a joke.
That's for tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you for sticking with us on this one. I mean, I can't say enough bad things about these people. Well, we did. I mean, it was 2 episodes, so that's got to count for something.
Enough is enough.
Enough is enough. All right, folks. Till next time.
Good night.
Stay cool.
God bless.
Be well.
Bye-bye.
Never seen the show. You got to, bro. Never seen the show. You got to, bro. Never seen the show. You got to, bro. but never seen the show. You got to, bro.